Story 1. Stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about, my dad used to say. It was a clear threat, meaning, do what I tell you or I will hurt you. My mom often predicted that I would quit university before earning my degree. Since childhood, she discouraged my ambitions and acted as though graduating with a bachelor's degree and high honors was a fluke. I paid for my education while supporting myself in my own apartment. She just couldn't handle having a successful daughter. Story 2. Said there isn't a court in the land that would find me guilty if I strangled you. When I had an anaphylactic reaction due to a trace exposure, I decided that if I could still slightly breathe, then it wasn't worth going to the hospital. I was given a bell and told to ring it if I stopped breathing, then went to bed. Similarly, I had to take myself to the hospital with a 41.5-degree fever. She works in that hospital, which is about 5 meters away. Story 3. Forcing them to finish their food even if they said they weren't hungry, especially when I didn't choose how much to serve on my plate initially. Story 4. Comparing them to each other affects their self-esteem and creates feelings of rivalry or resentment. Story 5. I would never tell my children I wished they were never born because I spent most of my childhood silently trying to resolve that issue. Story 6. Lecture about something I did wrong. Yes, I made a mistake. I know I made a mistake. I don't need to stand here for the next 10 minutes while you talk about how I made a mistake. Sometimes, children are just children. They don't always have a clear reason for why they did something. Story 7. There is a lot to unpack, but the most recent issue was my mother blaming her cancer on me. I was estranged from her for a period due to how she treated me as a child, and she believes that caused her significant stress, which she claims could have led to her cancer. Additionally, I drove 500 miles from my home to stay with her and support her through treatment. It has been quite the experience. Story 8. Body jokes, racist jokes, and judging people do not question their sexuality and should allow them to make their mistakes. Story 9. Because I said so. How can you expect your children not to try it behind your back if you do not explain your reasoning to them first? Not everything should be learned the hard way. Story 10. Ask me who you think you are almost daily, especially if I show any confidence or self-esteem. Story 11. I will not physically discipline my child. They were not abusive per se. Still, in my opinion, it is an outdated way to parent. Story 12. When I was 6, go ahead and run away. I'll miss you, but I'll get over it after a day. If you die, the same applies. Story 13. My mother expressed in various ways during my teenage years that she did not want me. As an adult going through a difficult time, she said, if you're going to harm yourself, can you just do it already? I do not plan on having children, but I would never tell them they were unwanted if I did. Story 14. If I received too many presents, my mom would hide some and give them to other kids, often in front of me. Story 15. Mom signed me up for Weight Watchers as her buddy the day I turned 12. Dad was never there for anything. I invited him to everything: dance recitals, gymnastics competitions, piano recitals, and he chose not to show up. Story 16. I would never tell my kids that I wish they would disappear forever for liking a girl outside their religion. Story 17. My parents used drugs while I was in the womb and then, after I was born, neglected me for 2 months. They took me to my grandmother's house and abandoned me there, never returning. Story 18. My mom said to me, at age 11, why don't I get you a bed and find you a husband so you can sleep with him like I sleep with your dad, since you're always competing with me? Story 19. Calling me a quitter as a way to encourage motivation works for some, but for me, it always made me feel bad about myself. They are great, though. Story 20. My parents were not bad parents, but they believed that no one from our background could improve their circumstances. I accepted this idea for a long time. I want my children to know that I will support them in pursuing any dream they have, although it has been financially challenging due to the number of extracurricular activities they enjoy. Story 21. My father treated me poorly and belittled my mother. I would never do any of these things to my sweet, innocent children. Fortunately, my dad has completely changed his ways and is a different person now. However, in the past, he was a difficult person to deal with. Story 22. My mom told me she hated children. My dad constantly criticized me. He thought it was amusing, like he was Archie Bunker. It was never amusing. It was embarrassing and humiliating. Story 23. Mother was controlling and selfish. Dad was my hero and I vowed to be like him. I hope I have succeeded. Story 24. Don't wake me up just to tell me you are staying out late. My parents hated being woken up. It bothered them more than the fact I was out late. If I came in and made a noise that woke them up, they would freak out. I didn't care how late it was or how much noise my kids made as long as I knew they were safe. My parents were a bit odd. Story 25. At the beginning of every school year, all the way up through high school, my dad would tell them, "Don't be afraid to use your belt on him if you need to." Here I was, 17 years old, and my dad was implying that I needed a belt whipping. Story 26. My dad told me he would put me in an orphanage during a random conversation when I was 11. I will never forget that feeling. I wasn't even acting out or talking back at all. Story 27. Not getting them help when they need it is concerning. I remember suddenly losing my grades in middle school. My parents thought it was just laziness. I never received help and was medicated 7 years later. Life has been a blessing since. I would never want my children to avoid planning their future because they don't see themselves here when it happens. Story 28. Encourage them to express themselves by writing about their feelings. It's important for them to communicate when something is bothering them, even if it may be difficult to hear. They should feel comfortable telling an adult when they are upset or hurt. Story 29. My father would often say, "No one in this family has ever done anything great, and they never will." At the time, I believed I would prove him wrong, and I did. Story 30. Forcing them to eat something they can no longer consume. As I ate half of the food I was served, which I liked, I couldn't fully finish it. They kept saying, "There are kids who don't eat. You should be grateful." I understand this, but it led me to develop serious eating disorders for a period. Story 31. I will make my child trust me to the point where they do not want to lie when I ask them if they did something wrong. Everyone makes mistakes. It is okay. If I had been comfortable enough, perhaps I would not have lied so much as a child. Story 32. Force them to eat even though they are full. Lying about trivial matters just because it is convenient for me. Story 33. Sticks and stones may break your bones, but words will never hurt you. Just turn the other cheek. However, they can hurt more and for much longer. Story 34. I will never have children, but if I did, I would interact with my transgender preteen and refer to her respectfully to my spouse. Story 35. I will never use going to the doctor or therapist as a threat like my parents did. It still makes it hard to actually seek medical help when needed, along with the United States medical system in general. I have cleaned and superglued so many injuries that probably needed stitches, and I typically figure that if a pain doesn't kill me, it can't be that bad. Story 36. Any physical punishment, such as spanking, emotional punishment like the silent treatment or yelling at them, intimidation through threatening body language, threatening to throw away their belongings, or threatening to harm their pets is unacceptable. I would never subject my children to any of these methods. Story 37. I won't share the heavier details, but some remarks that come to mind are, "You're the reason your father and I are getting a divorce. I hate you." And when my mother blamed me for my younger siblings' attempted suicide, threatening to send me to my grandparents so I wouldn't influence them to be gay. Story 38. Well, I wouldn't do what my father did. He brought me to his girlfriend's home, despite my parents being married, to hasten the process of leaving her. It ended with them making out on a sofa, and I used the restroom to escape the situation. I didn't understand why my dad did that with another woman. They took me to a carnival and forced me to walk in the middle while holding hands with them. I would never hurt my future child that way. It causes major trust issues. I was 4 or 5 years old and remember most of it. My father apparently cheated all the time, and my mother wouldn't split the family. Story 39. I am left-handed, and in my childhood, I was quite handy. My dad once said that being left-handed is almost like being lame. I would never say that to my child. Story 40. Make them feel bad for eating more than the parent deemed necessary, or make fun of the child for their messy room because they were depressed. I'm not filthy. I'm just exhausted. Or tell them that their friends do not like them, and the only people they can trust are their parents. Also, I would not tell them to go to college and then mock them for it, saying they think they are smarter than everyone if they disagree with me. My dad loves me, always has, but he had no idea how to be gentle with me or have a healthy relationship with me. Story 41. You are going to grow up to be a drug addict, said to a child who has never used drugs, by parents who were constantly under the influence. I do not understand why parents feel the need to call their children names they should be calling themselves. To this day, I have only smoked marijuana. Story 42. Mine has called me an ungrateful, selfish person and other similar terms in completely uncalled for situations. She has never called my brother a bastard in similar situations. Story 43. This is niche, but growing up, I had a protruding abdomen, and my mom would tell me to suck it in. When I asked when my stomach would be flat like hers, she would say it would happen when I built up muscles from holding it in. My mom had cosmetic surgery to tighten her abdomen, and I have uneven abdominal muscles. Story 44. Tease them relentlessly about something important to them, then tell them they are too sensitive when they are finally pushed over the edge. Story 45. Withholding meals as punishment, physically disciplining, or intentionally embarrassing her is not an appropriate approach. My child is now 21 years old, and I have adhered to these practices. Story 46. My parents always said, because I said so. This approach made me more rebellious, and it didn't have to be that way. Story 47. I finally broke down crying and told my mom I was scared and nervous all the time when I was 6. She told me to pray it away and that God works everything out. I love my parents dearly, and mental health was viewed differently in the 1990s, but if I had only gotten help sooner. If I ever have a child, I want them to feel comfortable inside and out. I would build them up, as my mom often made my sister and me feel bad about our looks. This turned out to be generational trauma from my grandmother, who has been gone for about 25 years, yet we are still dealing with it. Story 48. What is something your parents did or said to you that you would never do to your child? Have them in the first place. Story 49. Not a parent. Never going to be, but I certainly would not use emotional manipulation or physical punishment. Story 50. One example is when I was feeling terrible and my mom said to smile through it and stop acting like it is the end of the world. Guess who now needs therapy? Story 51. She would ask me to go for a drive when I was a teenager, and then she would be stalking my adopted dad. She would tell us she was going to call our real father but never did. She was abusive to all of us. My adopted father, my grandparents, and me. She often mentioned how she knew I would take care of her in her old age. My siblings, as adults, went no contact with her. I tried, but she didn't change. She would go around town telling people she didn't understand why her children didn't talk to her, even though I still would. If she needs help within reason, we assist her. Otherwise, we stay away. My spouse and I tell our children that if something happens to us, they should find a place that will take decent care of us and go live their lives. Story 52. Why can't you just get married so I can be free of you? That is a crazy thing to say to a 14-year-old. Story 53. Take care of me when I get old. Mainly because I won't have children to say that to. I don't like being born with that expectation. Story 54. Use the silent treatment against them. She used to say it was because she didn't want to say something she would regret. But that just means that for the whole week she's not speaking to you. You also know she's thinking awful things about you. It didn't matter if you had a valid point or feeling because the silent treatment ends when you apologize, and then you just pretend like nothing happened. Story 55. My brother and I experienced abuse, but the worst part for me was being hit across the face. It was demeaning and humiliating, especially when others were present. I never treated my sibling that way. Story 56. If I had children, I would do my best to support them when they were struggling in school. My father would lose his patience and end up raising his voice when we did homework corrections because I had difficulty keeping up. Story 57. Try to encourage them to choose their own names because I always wanted to have a say in mine as a child. Let the kids pick their names when they are old enough. It can always be changed later. Story 58. My mom asked if I really thought I fit in here while we were shopping at Abercrombie and Fitch. That memory stuck with me, along with her never apologizing or approaching me after an argument. Story 59. Corporal punishment. Growing up in the Caribbean with Caribbean parents, corporal punishment is considered abuse. Story 60. My parents frequently mocked me. I grew up with what was likely a speech impediment, albeit a mild one. My dad would interrupt me while I was talking, bend down so he was in my face, and mumble gibberish in a high-pitched voice. 20 years later, that still hurts. Story 61. Hit repeatedly with the buckle end of a belt until bruised and bloody, while quoting Bible verses and stating that sparing the rod spoils the child. Story 62. My mother always told me I was lazy and worthless. She often threatened to send me to foster care over small things like forgetting an item on a grocery list. She would scream for the neighbors to hear about her misery. I would be devastated if I ever put my child through that. I want them to grow up feeling loved and understanding that mistakes are normal. Story 63. If you ever bring home a black girl, you will be kicked out. If you get your best friend pregnant, do not bother asking for help. My dad was what you might call a negative person. Story 64. Filling the house with unhealthy food and not setting limits on consumption, while spending your childhood or adolescence with overweight individuals, is not beneficial at all. Story 65. Beat her until she can't sit or barely stand, almost kill her mother in front of her many times, break any of her bones, talk badly about her mother in front of her even though she is not a good person. I could go on about both of my parents, but I don't want to suppress those feelings again. It's crazy to realize just how much your childhood affects you as an adult, such as being hypervigilant about everything around you because you know someone is going to lie to you about something and having major trust issues. The worst for me is always wondering what's wrong with me and why no one can really love me. Many people say it's just the women I've been with, but with all the love in the world, why can't I have just a little bit? Story 66. Smacking them in the face repeatedly for disagreement. Standing by while someone smacks them in the face. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.